Welcome to the Divorce View Talk Show. Hi, it's Joanie Winberg, certified human behavior consultant, divorce mentor, and founder of GettingAlongSolutions.com. Every week it's a pleasure for me to do this show together, the Divorce View Show, with my co-host, Rosalind and Sedacca. Hello, Roz.
Hi, Joanie. Good to see you again this week. I'm Rosalind Sedacca. I'm considered the voice of child-centered divorce, a divorce and parenting coach, founder of the Child-Centered Divorce Network, and author of How Do I Tell the Kids About the Divorce. And today we're going to be talking about relationship issues related to divorce. And we have a wonderful expert who's an author as well. And I'm very excited about the depth of information she has to share with us. Her name is Dr. Deborah Hecker, and she's the author of Who Am I Without My Partner? Deb, good to see you today.
Hi, Roz. Hi, Joanie. It's a pleasure.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Here.
Welcome. Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and your practice before we start getting into a little more details?
Well, I've been in private practice for over 35 years with a specialization in helping people navigate their way through divorce. People will come to me if they're contemplating divorce, actually during the legal process, and post-divorce if they're having difficulty coming to grips with the situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that covers it all. And tell us what motivated you to write your book?
Many years ago, I went through a very painful divorce, and at the time, I lived in Washington, D.C., and of course there was plenty of professional help. But what I realized at the time was that there was not anyone who truly understood the kind of identity crisis that I was going through. People understood the grief, which of course is an inevitable part of the divorce process. So I kind of made it my mission to figure it out on my own, and as a result, I did a lot of introspection personally, and I did a lot of research about relationships, and I thought I don't want other people to go through this same process, and so I decided I'm going to write a book on this.
Excellent, excellent. And I think that's what leads us to such a great topic today, which is how to divorce-proof your relationship. You know, we've had a lot of people writing in and having an interest in that. And so, Deb, when we talked about this, we talked about not necessarily, or kind of both, if you're married, but also if you're after divorce, you know, how to protect that second or that new relationship, because we know the divorce rate is even higher for the second and third time. So, Deb, can you fill us in a little bit about how to start thinking and helping people to divorce-proof their relationship?
Well, Joanie, there are different reasons why people divorce. I mean, if you pick up a professional journal or magazine, you're going to read about certain external kinds of issues like difficulty communicating, infidelity, money-related issues, gender differences, etc., or even just expectations that people have about marriage. After 35 years of practice, I have come to the conclusion that in large part the reason why marriages fail is because people have a tendency to look to their spouse rather than to themselves to develop a sense of who they are. So inevitably what happens if they're not looking inwardly, they're looking to their partner. And so typically what happens is people will project onto their partners their notion of what their partners should be and who they ideally are, but in fact that isn't who they are. And so then inevitably they become disappointed. And so in order to really, really understand why marriages and partnerships in general go south, we have to look back in time to, I think, the early parent-child relationship, not so much to the time that we met our spouse, but really to the time that human connection was formed, when we first learned how to how to love, how to have empathy, how to deal with our hostility, etc. Because it was at that point that we learned really about human connection. And if there's a problem at that point, what's going to happen is that these deficits will get played out in our adult relationships.
So you're saying if we don't have a good role model, or the environment is toxic, or the relationship isn't healthy, or the relationship in general isn't healthy, and we don't have that role model, it can make it more difficult?
I would put it in terms of identity formation. There's a particular psychologist who I think is brilliant. Her name is Dr. Margaret Mahler, and she talks about how infants become individuated. And so I'm referring here to what happens when that initial relationship has some difficulties in it, and so the child does not really get what he or she needs, and therefore as they become adults, they're going to look to their partner to make up for that, in contrast to someone who does get more or less what they need, and they will be a more contained, clearly identified person. And by the way, Joanie, I don't mean to make it sound like there's such a perfect thing as perfect parenting, because there's not. So we're talking more or less here.
And also, too, that we always seem, in general, to be attracted to our opposites. So this kind of piggybacks off of what you're saying, is that we're looking for that other person to more or less maybe make up for what's missing. But in general, we tend to be attracted to our opposites. And so would you say that is kind of filling that void of maybe what is missing, because our personalities are opposites?
Oh, no, I completely agree with you. And what happens is we look to our partner for what we don't have. And that is not really a good model for a partnership, and it's very likely to lead to destruction.
That terrible phrase from the famous movie, when you complete me, it is a perfect example of just what we shouldn't be doing.
Exactly. What was, I'm trying to think, what was with
Tom Cruise.
Yeah, Tom Cruise, exactly. Exactly. I can't think of the name of the movie.
Color of Money, I think it was. But yes, Color of Money, was it?
No, I can't. No, I don't think it was Color of Money. But what happens is we look to, Roz, picking up on what you're saying, we look to our partner to complete us, and then what happens is we get very anxious if our partner is not doing for us what we think they should be doing, and so then we start acting out in all kinds of ways. So yes, we look to our partners to define who we are, and that is a poor excuse for a relationship. But it's really what I do in my practice. I help people who develop what I'll call maladaptive dependency needs. You've heard the term, for example, codependent and counterdependent. So again, if these early deficits are part of what are still a part of the adult personality, then what happens is they will play themselves out in certain dependency needs, and that's where the nature of the partnership becomes problematic.
We set ourselves up for failure and disappointment right from the beginning, because no one can live up to those expectations.
Absolutely. Deb, do you think it would be helpful, because I do a lot with people on helping them understand the different personalities. Mm-hmm. Do you think, and I have seen it, where it's helpful when people start to understand, okay, we are all unique, and we are attracted to each other, and the opposites do attract to each other, but if they start to understand what they each bring to the table. So if one is more of a techie person, they're usually attracted to the free-flowing party person type of a personality. And so if they can say, you know what, we are opposites, but if we meet in the middle, we can really be very successful here. But I think, to me, I was just asking as far as that would be helpful if people could be conscious that they are opposites and to understand each other's personalities.
I think being opposites is okay. I think the problem is when we rely on that other person for something we should be doing for ourselves. So, for example, if the partner is opposite and there's something about what that partner is doing that is appealing to us. Maybe we need to develop that within ourselves. So it's not so much the opposite factor. I mean, obviously people have to find compatibility and common ground. I think more that, you know, one thinks they're going to live through their partner. It's like
Exactly.
partners like this, and it's not happening consciously. You know, I'll depend on my partner. So actually, in a way, Joanie, picking up on what you're saying, I think that there's something appealing about having a partner who's different than we are, because we can learn from them. That can be a healthy thing.
Yes, yes, absolutely, definitely. And I know that type of couple usually is attracted. And I remember working with a couple, and the person that was the planner said, you know, we're going to go on a trip. Let me do all the research and the planning. I love that. And of course, the other one was the free spirit, more party person. And they said, okay, you do that. But the deal is when we get there, I'm planning the parties. So, you know, they both did meet in the middle, and they respected each other. And I think that's where a lot of couples, even before they get married, are clueless to the opposite person, but also they don't appreciate and respect them, and then they start what maybe attracted them when they were dating, because it was opposite, it was kind of getting them out of their comfort zone. Then those become the quirks and the things that bug a person when they get married or in a situation or a relationship. Have you seen that?
What I wanted to just briefly mention to our listeners is my concept of what a healthy relationship is, so people know what it is I'm referring to here. I think of a relationship as having three distinct entities. There are the two individuals, and then we have the relationship that they create between the two of them. And each individual must be, in an ideal world, must be well-defined, have very clear-cut boundaries, so that they have a strong sense of themselves. They allow their partner to do the same, and so they can come together and be open and honest with one another and accept the differences and not be threatened by that. So again, we have the three entities. I mean, it really, in my view, it sort of takes three to tango. And if you want a healthy partnership, there's always a need to address all three of those entities. People typically think of a relationship as two individuals, but it's really each individual has their own identity and a life apart from the partnership. And that's really how I conceptualize a healthy partnership. Of course, what happens when it's not so healthy is that someone may get insecure about their partner's individuality or identity, or their need for independence, etc.
So how would you suggest if they're going back out into a new relationship? How can they kind of divorce-proof that new relationship or that new marriage second time around? Any thoughts on that?
I do. I have a couple of what I'll call guiding principles that I think of in response to that question. The first one has to do with really being honest with yourself. To thine own self be true. It is extremely important that someone can look to themselves and not just be looking to their partner. Even if their partner is doing things that are not good for the relationship, it's extremely important that we each look at ourselves and take ownership of what our deficits are, and also what our fears are in the relationship. We need to do that. I also, the kind of work I do with my clients, I think this is something that our viewers can do, is you want to look back to the early relationship and figure out where some of your needs were not met, and then how, in some respects, they're being played out, these dependency needs I referred to earlier, how they're getting played out in the adult relationships. So, of course, again, the idea of a codependent relationship, which we've all heard, which is characterized by a kind of insecurity, someone who doesn't really have the confidence to take care of themselves. They tend to look to their partner to make the changes in the relationship, etc. Or we have what's called the counterdependent, and these are people who are fearful of intimacy, who are not comfortable with their needs or their partner's needs. So these are the resulting dependency problems from the early deficit. So one, I think people need to take a look at themselves honestly and look at, where am I playing out some of my stuff with my partner that I really need to figure out for myself. And then they can identify the behaviors that they want to change, and then they can work on really developing their sense of self. What are my values? Who am I? You know, how do I define myself apart from my partner?
Mm-hmm. So when you're talking about the three parts of the relationship, is it basically a you, a me, and a we? Is that?
Exactly. I've actually developed what I call a partnership model, and I call it yours, mine, and ours partnership done right. So again, you know, each individual must have their own distinct identity with very clear-cut boundaries. And when people come into a relationship with clear-cut boundaries, they're not threatened by opening themselves up to their partner. The problem comes in when they're not clearly defined, and so all kinds of anxieties are going to develop about getting swallowed up by their partner, not, you know, feeling insecure that they're not going to get what they need from their partner. So yes, there are three entities, and all three of those entities must continuously be nurtured.
Mm-hmm.
I can see how valuable this work is, and maybe that's why second and third marriage, divorce rates are higher, because people are not, in your professional opinion, both of you really, that people are not taking the time to do that work in order to have those healthy boundaries that you're talking about, or that know their own values.
And that's exactly right, Joanie. I mean, I believe that, yes, there are these external reasons that I mentioned earlier, you know, infidelity, if there's divorce in your family, poor communication, all of those are factors, but I believe that the core of why relationships don't work out is because, again, we are not secure as individuals, and therefore we look to our partner, and it's happening unconsciously. And you know, I can tell you briefly, in my own marriage for many years ago, you know, to all outward appearances, I was this very independent person. I had, you know, my family and I had moved to Washington, D.C. I had a practice in D.C. I had a practice in New York. I had 2 children. I had all the degrees I needed. I was like, you know, I really had it together. And then after my husband came in one day and said to me, I have a commitment to another woman, if the expression "to die of a broken heart" has any meaning, that's what I felt was going to happen to me. But I had to do a lot of soul searching, yes, because in ways I was playing out things that were not obvious at all, and I had a lot of my own work to do to really define very clearly who I was, in very subtle dependencies.
And that's something Roz and I have always said, you know, to take the time, come up for air, rediscover yourself after your divorce, or even after a long-term relationship, before you hop into another one. This is the time to come up for air and get to know yourself. And I know Roz mentioned before for herself, and also for me, I had to do that work and do the deal, because and this is what I say to my clients: you end up dating the person you just divorced, and it was so clear now that I look back that that's what I did. I dated the exact same person I just divorced until I really did the work.
Well, there are really 2 parallel tracks if we're talking about letting go of one relationship and then getting into another. There are 2 things that need to happen. One, there needs to be a grieving period. People cannot let go and reconnect simultaneously. So they really, whenever there's attachment and then there's loss, there's going to be a period of grieving. The problem comes in with many people is that grieving is painful, and they want to do anything they can to avoid it. And of course, one of those behaviors is to quickly repartner. I mean, we all know that happens. People just immediately want to repartner rather than, Joanie, kind of doing the work that you're suggesting. And it's really about, you know, who am I without my partner, and developing yourself as a separate person. And it is interesting because the divorce rate just keeps going up. From, you know, first marriage is 45, 50%, second marriage is 60%, third marriage is in the 70%, so something is not happening. That's to happen here, and I believe it has to do with really, doing that hard work to come into your own and have a, bottom line is, if you want to get through the storms of life, you have to be able to rely on yourself.
And that's the truth. Before we move any further, I want to make sure our viewers can find you and what you have to offer. So why don't you tell us about your website, your books, and anything else so that people can get a hold of you.
Sure. My website is www.Dr. Deborah, D-E-B-O-R-A-H, Hecker, H-E-C-K-E-R. My book is called Who Am I Without My Partner? Post-Divorce Healing and Rediscovering Yourself. And on the website is a lot of information, articles I've written, podcasts that I've done, interviews that I've had. If somebody wants to learn more about my thinking about the individual and what they go through post-divorce, I encourage them to go to the website, and I'd be more than happy and delighted to talk with anybody who has any questions, or if I can help them in any way if they're struggling through the process or contemplating divorce.
So can they find you at an email address or a phone number that you want to share?
My phone number is 888-777-3585, and my email address is Deb, D-E-B, at Dr. Deborah, D-E-B-O-R-A-H, Hecker.com.
Excellent.
Wonderful.
Well,
I
just
just want to say I love the name of that book because I think it really hits on the head. Who am I without my partner? It's a very shocking presence to suddenly be without someone that you've either taken for granted or just have been with for any period of time. And you really do have to reevaluate your selfness versus that coupleness state.
Exactly.
So I'd love you to just talk a little bit more about that because it seems so fundamental to everything about relationships.
Well, just to personalize it for a minute, once again, I was so surprised after my divorce that it just seems like a long time. I was having trouble kind of getting on my feet again, and I didn't understand it. And I slowly began to realize that it really had to do with a certain kind of dependency that I had on my husband, which I was very oblivious to because I really was functioning pretty independently. And so that's where that title came in, Who Am I Without My Partner? I think most people tend to circumvent that part of the process. And, if you think about young marriages, people who are like 25, the whole concept of a starter marriage, people very quickly get into a relationship and it's like, okay, let's move on. I mean, that whole concept of what is a healthy partnership is really missed by people. So again, I just think it's so important that in a really fine relationship, you've got two well-defined people who come together. In some sense, marriages later on in life, for example, midlife marriages or afterwards, where people are a little bit more clear about who they are, what their needs are, what their values are, I think there's a lot of potential there. Whereas if we get married at a young age, there's much more of a tendency to kind of, enmesh ourselves with our spouses.
Absolutely. So as far as, something like one thing that someone could walk away with, Deb, from you, as far as something to get them started, if they're saying, okay, I want to divorce-proof my next relationship, I don't want to marry the same person I just divorced, what's kind of something they could take away to get them started, walk away with?
I think the single most important thing is to look at yourself. To thine own self be true. You really have to, and it sounds like it's an easy thing to do, but it is so much easier to externalize the blame onto the marriage, the partner, the situation, and of course so many times the partner, brings a lot of stuff to the marriage that really creates problems. But I think the most important thing is to say, what do I need to look at here? What was my contribution? And I think that's and I'm not saying that one should do that to the exclusion of looking at the interpersonal dynamic, but I think one has to really take ownership of who they are, and that is where the growth takes place. That is where the sense of identity really gets formed.
And I think for people to realize, too, that the only person you can change is yourself. So as soon as we stop pointing the finger and saying it was the relationship, it was him or her, we're having a little bit of an echo problem here. But as far as, you know, I think when someone says to themselves, okay, I'm going to look in the mirror, I'm going to work on me, and I'm the only one that I can work on and change. I think that right there is half the battle.
Also, I know in my particular case, it was a real sort of dramatic, ugly situation with another woman and all of that. So it was very easy to point the finger at him and you know, what a creep he was. It took me a long time to be humbled and say, okay, I must have had some role in this.
Yeah.
And so that's where, you know, that's where the growth took place. And in my second marriage, I was a very different person. I was very much my own person in a way that I had not been.
More conscious.
Right. Exactly.
So once again, your website, Deb, that they can go to learn more about you and your book. What your website again?
www.drdeborahhecker.com. And my book is Who Am I Without My Partner? Post-Divorce Healing and Rediscovering Yourself.
And Deb, you also provide coaching services and therapy services via phone and Skype, so people don't have to be local to you. Is that correct?
I have clients, Joanie and Ros, all over the world, all over the country. I'm very happy to work with someone wherever they are. And of course, with modern technology, that's pretty easy to do. So yes, I'm available to anybody.
That's wonderful.
And I welcome calls. I'd be delighted to talk to anybody.
And also, Deb, thanks so much for being on the show. We really appreciate you being here today. Great information.
Absolutely.
And also to our listeners, to make sure that if you'd like to view this again, to tune into divorceview.com, where you can actually see the show again, the video. And also, we are also going to become a podcast as well, so we'll be getting more information out to our listeners too. So you will have that ability as well. Roz, any other thoughts before we go?
Well, I thought this was a very valuable conversation. It's a good relationship is the foundation of a happy life and also better parenting. So next time around, we all want to do it right, and there were some wonderful suggestions today. Thank you so much, Dr. Deborah Hecker.
Thank you.
Thanks. And thanks to our listeners. And until then, we'll see you next week, and thanks for tuning in.